You know, words. We use them every single day, right? To connect, to create, to figure things out. But they have this incredible power, this dual nature that can build entire worlds or, yeah, tear them right down.
So, what happens when a language, the very thing we rely on for understanding, gets turned into a weapon? And on the flip side, what happens when it becomes a shield? Today, we're going to dig into these two sides of the very same, very powerful coin. All right, we're going to start with one of the most amazing stories from World War II, the Navajo Code Talkers, and how their language became a literally unbreakable code. And here's the incredible irony at the heart of their story. For decades, the U.S. government had actively tried to wipe out the Navajo language, forcing kids in boarding schools not to speak it. And yet, this exact same language became the secret weapon that was absolutely crucial to winning the war in the Pacific. Just think about that. So what made it so powerful? Well, it all starts with this idea of an oral tradition. Now, this isn't just about telling stories around a campfire. This is a community's entire library of culture and history, passed down not in books, but in the living, breathing collective memory of its people. And that tradition gives you a huge strategic advantage. Memory becomes this trained, almost muscular tool. But the most important part? What isn't written down can't be stolen. You can't capture a memory like you can capture a codebook. It's a living text, always adapting. Okay, now let's see how they took this to a whole other level. Because this wasn't just about speaking Navajo, it was about thinking in Navajo. This is where poetry became a weapon, and something as beautiful as a metaphor completely defeated the world's best codebreakers. We all know what a metaphor is, right? It's when you describe something by calling it something else it isn't, literally. You're creating this whole new poetic layer of meaning. And while the enemy's code-breaking machines were brilliant at math and literal substitution, they were totally, completely stumped by poetry. And here's where it gets so cool. Check out these examples. A submarine wasn't just a translated word. It was poetically described as beslow, or ironfish. A dive bomber? That became guinea, a chicken hawk. A battleship wasn't just a battleship. It was loto, a whale. You see, this is a code built on a worldview, not just a dictionary. And this really gets to the key difference. A cipher, which is what the enemy was used to, is mathematical and rigid. You swap one letter for another, but the Navajo system was a code. It's linguistic, it's fluid, it's all about meaning. And this made it incredibly fast. Saying whale takes less than a second. Trying to spell out battleship with a cipher while you're under fire, that could take minutes. And after the war, the code talkers were sworn to absolute secrecy. They couldn't even tell their own families about the heroic things they'd done. It was a silence born out of this profound sense of integrity and duty. But silence isn't always a choice of honor. Sometimes it's a tool of oppression. So let's flip this coin over. We're jumping ahead to the 1950s, the Red Scare, and the absolutely terrifying power of accusation. We're talking about how words were weaponized, not to save a country, but to tear it apart from the inside out. This quote, it just sums up the whole era perfectly. In a culture of fear, silence is the only safety. See, this wasn't the silence of integrity like the code talkers. This was the silence of pure survival. So how does this kind of mass hysteria even happen? Well, you can kind of break it down into 4 steps. First, you create an enemy. Then, you start accusing people without any evidence. Pretty soon, fear just completely takes over and overrides all logic. And the final step? The very bonds that hold a community together, they just shatter. The playwright Arthur Miller captured this perfectly in The Crucible, which was really an allegory for the Red Scare. When the main character, John Proctor, is being forced to sign a false confession, he just screams, "Because it is my name, because I cannot have another in my life." He got it. He understood that once your name, your reputation, is destroyed by words, you've got nothing left. And this gets to the heart of what integrity meant back then, the personal cost of telling the truth. For all those people on the Hollywood blacklist, protecting their name and refusing to falsely accuse their friends meant losing everything, their careers, their livelihoods, all of it. A really stark contrast to the silence of the code talkers, isn't it? So, why does any of this matter to us today? Well, this timeless battle over words, silence, and who you are is now being fought on a brand new front. Our data and the story it tells about every single one of us. And this brings up a fundamental clash in how we see the world. On the one hand, you have Western copyright law, which sees stories and knowledge as individual property that you protect for a limited time. But on the other hand, many indigenous laws see it as custodianship, a sacred responsibility of a whole community that lasts forever. One protects property, the other protects relationships. And this whole conflict leads to a really important modern idea: data sovereignty. It's basically the fundamental right of a people to be in charge of their own data, how it's collected, who owns it, and how it gets used. It's really about self-determination in the digital age. And this isn't just theory, this is a real-world fight. Back in the 90s, the Havasupai tribe gave blood samples to help with diabetes research. But years later, they found out those same samples were being used without their permission for studies on schizophrenia and migration, subjects that carry a deep cultural stigma for them. Their legal victory in 2010, which forced the return of the samples, was a huge turning point against this kind of biocolonialism. So, where does all this leave us? We've seen how language can be a shield and a sword. We've seen how silence can be a point of honor or a tool of fear. And we've seen how the fight for a name is now happening with our data. It all really boils down to a few fundamental questions. First, who owns a language? I mean, is it the people who speak it? The government that once tried to stamp it out? Who gets to decide that? And if a language is a story, then who owns your story? In a world where our data is being collected and used in ways we can barely even comprehend, that question has never been more urgent. Which brings us to the last, and maybe the most important point. The one that John Proctor and the blacklisted artists and the Navajo code talkers all had to face in their own way. What is your name worth?